So just to let everyone know that we record and put this up on our YouTube channel. Okay. A few more minutes, couple of minutes. People to join. Welcome everyone who's joining us. We are recording because this goes up onto our YouTube channel for those that registered but then can't make it. Had some pretty good responses in our last round of Ask Professionals. So, okay. Well, I'm going to start with the acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting today in Canberra, and pay respect to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present. And I extend this respect to all Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And I welcome anyone who's joining us to please include where you're paying your respects from in the chat, and maybe give your name and your role as well. That would be great, just to start to connect with everyone else who's joining. Welcome. My name is Bri Norton. I'm co-chair of OZeWAI with Amanda Mate, and we have been tag teaming on these Ask the Professional events and moderating them. They've been very exciting, and this one is even more exciting because it was one of the biggest topic responses in our survey about inclusive research, and finding people with a variety of backgrounds to be included in your research or usability testing. So a little bit about OZeWAI. We used to be an annual conference for about 20 years, and then we did a bit of research and decided to adapt to become a professional membership organisation. So please support us. We're a not-for-profit. Everything goes back into the community. Please subscribe to our newsletter, but also consider joining. There's actually an advocacy joining fee as well. And there's a variety of options for membership, including those who are involved in the accessibility community to find accessibility specialists as well. We have we have a regular newsletter, monthly newsletter. We partner with in-person events now instead of running our own annual conference, and we've got a few events coming up this year. They're all on our website, OZeWAI.org. And we also have a survey that we would love people to complete for us. It's in your agenda document that you would have received with your Humanities, but I'm also putting it in the chat. We would love people to do this survey. We're going to leave it open till the end of April. It's for the Future Skills Organisation research into the digital gap in Australian education and employment. And we would like to know what organisations are doing about accessibility and digital accessibility. Do they have teams? Do they have a person? Where are they finding people? How are they being trained? So that we can actually get some research and some evidence that there is a gap in this area. Right. Well, I'm going to go first to Irith and to do our speakers so they can do an introduction for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Bri. Hi, everyone. I'm Irith. Thanks very much for coming. I work with Bri on developing and delivering the inclusive research operations workshops training. And I am a strategic designer and researcher in services and products. And I've been interested in design as a domain, health as a domain for design for pretty much the whole of my career, which is coming up for about 14 years now. And so, yeah, I've worked in various health settings and non-health settings, higher education, SaaS products. Yeah, and I'm really excited to talk to you all today. And I also sit with Ricki on the Consumers Health Forum of Australia Digital Health Special Interest Group.
So thanks, Irith. And Yasmine, would you like to do some intros, please? Oh, I think you're on mute.
There always has to be one that doesn't. I'm Yasmine Gray. I'm the founding director of Get Aboutable. We specialize in accessibility and inclusion in the tourism space. We have an annual conference on accessible tourism, and we do consulting work as well. So if you're interested in having help. Well, I'll talk about it a bit later in the webinar as well. But yeah, in terms of helping businesses be more inclusive and accessible. Yeah.
Thanks, Yasmine. It's great to have you here. And Ricki, would you like to do a little intro?
And hello, everyone, and all of you around Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the lands of which I'm coming from today, and that is the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. I am a First Nations trans woman from the Stolen generation. I'm currently doing my PhD at the University of Melbourne in how to affirm gender healthcare for young people, but in the early adolescence years. I'm also a strong advocate and work in the area in many spaces in public health and empathy. And one of the things that I think is so important is about bringing communities together, and how can digital apps really support our way of communicating our needs. So looking at from the lens of those in regional remote areas for our First Nations and people living with disabilities, multicultural, newly arrived people, older people, and those who are, you know, precariously dealing with housing scarcity. So really, let's working together to find how we can get our apps to be part of us, because for some of us, like I'm finding, is it's our life. It is our gateway to accessing critical health services. So I'm all about passionate about disrupting, designing through a very binary lens and really opening up to the space of creativity. Thank you for listening to me.
Oh, thanks, Ricki. It's so great to have you here. So I'm going to go to our first question. It's actually to Yasmine, because it's probably one of the biggest questions that we get asked a lot in our workshops. And it's about finding or building relationships with people from diverse backgrounds to be included in your research or your usability testing for any kind of digital products or services. And it should be happening all the time, iterative. You should be doing this all the time, different cohorts. Yasmine, what are the best ways or channels to find people with disability to be involved in user research or usability sessions?
Oh, I guess the most obvious way is to look within and around you, and so your staff, your clients, and don't just look for people who have visible disabilities. Perhaps putting out a note or an advertisement that you're looking for people with disability to help with your user testing. Also, contact disability advocacy organizations, such as People with Disability, or if you're targeting for particular groups, there are a number of advocacy organizations, and I'm sure Bri or myself or any of the panelists here can help you find some of those organizations if you don't know where to start.
Exactly right. And I'm going to go to Irith for that, just to follow on from that question. We cover this in some of the principles in our workshops, and it's one of the biggest and probably the hardest steps, isn't it? That kind of immersion principle that we talk about. Would you like to talk about that as well?
Sure. So yes, I often say think of friends and family. Like if you've got an urgent need and you're feeling really stuck, you know, do you have relatives, family members, know of friends who you know of who live with a disability? Just have a talk to them about, hey, can I get your insights on this? Sometimes we have people in our workplace, as Yasmine mentioned, we have to be careful about being respectful of our co-workers' time. So maybe having a talk to someone about, is there something, you know, something reciprocal that we can do, help you out on something and you help us out on something. And then if you really feel in the dark, social media is your friend. Learn how to, what are the useful hashtags? So, you know, accessibility is a great hashtag to follow on any social media platform. Disability is a great hashtag. If there's a particular lived experience that you're wanting to connect with, just hashtag that lived experience and see what comes up. And people will come up talking about their experiences, and probably organizations will come up too, and obviously Google. But yeah, so sort of start with what's immediately available to you, and then start to sort of it's just bread and butter networking. It's just sometimes we don't think to network with, you know, the disabled people in our population, but you can network with disabled people just as easily as anyone else.
Exactly right. So, Ricki, what language should people use to invite people from diverse backgrounds to participate in user research and usability testing? Language is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I guess it's a term that has been used in the last few years called easy read. And what easy read, and many of people listening may be aware of it, is to make sure that any information that you put out to communities is able to be understood without the jargon attached to it, and that the understanding is clear and explicit more, as opposed to being ambiguous in terms. So we try to situate the instructions and the language to the first year of high school. And basically, we also use things like imagery as well to kind of give people a variances of way of trying to take in that information. But also within the language space, there are other layers, and we need to be aware that, you know, gender, you know, is important to acknowledge
Yep.
that from, you know, different intersectionalities, First Nations communities, different ethnicities, that we respect that, and any language that we use is positively framed and inviting to participate.
Exactly right. And I think even Yasmine, we might just go to that kind of point of language. You know, if you're not too sure how to engage or discuss things with people, what's the best thing to do?
Speak with them as a person. I mean, I very often get asked, how do you speak with people with disability? I'm like, just like another person. You show respect, you show courtesy, you show genuine inquiry, genuine goodwill, and just like any relationship, it will flourish.
Yeah, no, that's great. Excellent. Did anyone else want to have add anything to that around language? Yes, Ricki.
Yeah, I think one of the most key things that we need to realize as humans, and we all do it, is to take our time when we speak, because we tend to rush through our sentences and when we're verbally speaking to somebody. And it's very important that when you're speaking to someone, maybe with different strengths, different forms of disabilities, is to sort of slow your pace down and really connect with the person, and always asking for feedback. Does that make sense? Can I say it in a different way for you? Would you like me to record that information for you? And you can have a think about it, giving time for people to process that information, so that they don't feel compelled to rush and anxious to respond to you. Thank you.
No, that's great, Ricki. And I'm actually going to go to Irith. I was going to ask you, Irith. It's
Sorry,
about
sorry
yes,
if I
Yasmine.
can just add to that. Ricki, I fully agree with you 100%, but I also ask people to actually listen to the person that they're speaking with, and realize if you're going too slow. I mean, just as you have to be cognizant if you're going too fast.
Yeah.
You have to be careful to not sound patronizing. And that's just, you know, when you're dealing with someone for the first time, you're judging where to pitch your language towards them. And I think it's important to be very cognizant of that, both ways. And I can speak as someone who has different days cognitively. Some days I'm like, hold on, slow down. My brain is not taking this in. Whereas other days I'm like, okay, come on, let's go. And if I'm feeling that within one person, you can imagine that in a, you know, population that can be very diverse. So yes, fully agree with what Ricki said, to be aware that you need to be conscious whether somebody can understand you or not. But yeah.
No, that's great. Good follow up there with some backup of just being aware of your own personal space and the way that you're listening to people. So, Irith, you were going to add to that.
Yes, and I just wanted to say this is a bit of a strong statement, but in my experience, anyone who has gone through a higher education system and writes content has been trained not to write content that's easily understood by the general population. And we take for granted, you know, we can say, oh, we've had this pamphlet on our, you know, in our office for 10 years and it's fine, everybody uses it. Content is the great unvalidated part of services and products. And content is the thing that can start getting tested from the earliest days. So you are going to get so far ahead if, as your content is being created in Word docs, in Google Docs, start showing it to people and asking if it's understandable, if it's straightforward, if it's clear. Don't ask for opinions. Do you think this is clear? Ask with critical thinking, what's your understanding of what this is saying to you? What action is it asking you to do? What options is it giving you? So start thinking critically about your content and getting it tested with, you know, real clients, real consumers. Because as I said, if you've gone through the higher education system, any ability that you had to do that will have been trained out of you.
That's a good point. And I just might take a note now. We've got quite a few people still joining. Please feel free to put in the chat where you're from, your name, and who you pay your respects to if you're on Indigenous land. And also, if you have any questions as we're going through this, please add them to the chat. We'll start to collect them and feed them in as we go through our discussion today around inclusive research and we're talking about people from diverse backgrounds being involved in your research and usability testing. So please feel free to add questions in the chat as we go and we'll collect them and feed that in. So Irith, another question around that, I guess, as well. It's not just about your participants either. How do you provide an accessible environment for researchers?
Yeah, so something that we do in our inclusive research operations training is to say to the attendees, look, actually everything that we're telling you applies to yourself and your team as well. But that's a whole other workshop. And it's great that there's much more profile now for, you know, neurodivergent workforces and people with experience of disability, in likelihood, you know, being co-workers. And it's about, you know, there's a culture of trust, but it's basically about saying to our co-workers and our teams, what do you need? What flexibilities are going to help you work the best? So understanding there's a few principles about giving people flexibility and control about how they do things, being open to asynchronicity. So being open to ways of working that are not like what we're doing right now with everybody at once. If people need information beforehand to prepare for something, if they need like a transcript or a video afterwards. So just making it, just normalizing it and making it an ordinary, everyday, normal thing to talk to your team members about, you know, how is this going to work best for everyone? Do we want to be working in Excel? Do we want to be working in Word documents? Like, what's our preferred ways of working? And giving people choice and autonomy about how they want to work. And creating environments that are safe enough for people to say, I can't concentrate to go through a transcript. I can't tag a transcript. I can't work like that. I need to work some other way. It might be I need to listen to an audio and just make notes. Like, just letting people work in the way that works best for their bodies and their brains, basically, and not being rigid, but allowing for flexibility and choice is what everything boils down to. And normalizing accommodations. If someone needs a break, you know, if someone can't work for 3 hours straight in some context, but like, you know, Bri said today to the speakers, if you need a break, just let me know and, you know, we'll just go with some of the other people while you're having a break. So just making things like breaks normal, decompression times normal.
Yasmine, do you have anything to add to that?
I love the normalizing, Irith. It's yeah, it's my dream. I mean, everybody knows how they work best. And yes, asking people and making that safe space, as you said, so that people can express look, I need a break, or, oh, it would be much easier if I could do it this way.
Yeah.
You know, people are the best at knowing themselves. What they're not so good at, because it's been trained in our society, is speaking up about it. They don't want to be the problem child. And, you know, that being able to make that safe space, having an announcement on your website or at the start of a document, or, you know, just in a number of different ways, just making the statement, we are open to feedback. If you have anything that could make your interaction with us better, easier, please let us know. And giving a name and a contact or a way of contacting. So say if it's in a document, have a generic email address where feedback goes back to. Or if you're in a meeting, you know, if the person speaking, you know, I'm thinking of our own conference, that we have a designated person on that anyone can go to say,
Yeah.
let us know what those accessibility needs or desires are. I mean, sometimes it's critical that you can't do your job without it, and sometimes it just makes your job easier. And it's a spectrum. So realizing that, you know, you might not lose a customer if you don't attend to their needs, but you might not get them as a repeat visitor, or, you know, get them as someone who will sing your praises and invite everybody to come to your event, and over and over and over again. So it's all about a spectrum, and you know, we talk about it as good customer service. Depending on the users in this forum, it might not be seen quite as customer service, but it's, you know, just a friendly, welcoming attitude, and trying to understand how to best address people's needs.
No, that's exactly right. And I think, you know, coming into, you know, we're here with a, you know, OZeWAI digital accessibility professionals, but we understand as digital accessibility professionals that we need to do the shift left. The shift left then becomes not so much about the tech, but more about the people. So it actually is a culture change that you need to think about, and it's that kind of respectfulness that you need to think about, that happens a little bit earlier when you're actually working with people and getting people involved in what you're developing, whether a product or a service. So, Yasmine, I think there's probably some common questions here as well around researchers sometimes have difficulties explaining why to include people with disability or from different backgrounds in their research activities. You know, how do they get that leadership buy-in? What are a couple of tips, so one to three top tips that people can do?
Number one, realize that 20% of the population, 1 in 5 people, have some sort of disability. That's 1 in 3 households. But also, when you think, I don't see that many disabled people, remember that 80% of disabilities are invisible. So we've mentioned neurodiversity. We've, you know, that not everybody is visibly disabled who needs adjustments. And of those people who have hidden disabilities, only 3% would acknowledge that disability publicly if they did not have to. And the reason for that is we still have tremendous stigma against disability. And again, I can't say enough how much that word of normalizing disability is important to me, because, you know, I can't hide my disability. I wish I could. And when, you know, it was a progressive disability, and I definitely hid it for as long as possible. There is tremendous stigma with disability. There's tremendous assumptions of what we can't do. And, you know, I'm a business owner. do tremendous work, and I know my limitations and I work around those limitations, but I've surrounded myself with people who build my business and do great work on it. And I have a role in that business. I couldn't do that if I didn't have some sorts of accommodation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just realizing that people with disability are so prevalent in society. And when we talked in that first question about where do you find people with disability, just look around you, because we are all over the place.
And I think there's an aspect of, you know, in the accessibility community, if you are, you know, talking and engaging people with disability earlier, you're actually going to reduce costs in what you're developing your services, because the more that you can fix or make more accessible and usable before you get to code, the less cost the cost will make. And it's that there's actually been a lot of studies on that. So trying to sell that to your leadership and say, if you leave it too late, it's actually going to add cost to the project, that the budget's going to blow out. That also could be another way. Irith and Ricki, do you have anything to say about trying to get people to buy in? You know, or trying to get leadership to understand that this is an important part of what they're developing. Ricki, would you like to go first?
Yeah, so the first thing I wanted to share with everyone, I put a little note, something called access keys. And this is something that I developed with Drummond Street services in Victoria. And I'm going to put a link to show everybody here what an access key looks like. And as the term key and access, so what it is like a document you produce, whether it's a visual or in some sort of format, where you look at the architectural spacings of anything you want to do or invite people into, whether it's a small meeting, whether it's a building, where you do the measurements of the room, how the doors open, how they close, the lighting, the sound, the smells, everything, whether there is carpet, whether it's sloped, how the toilets open in and out, how the toilet rolls are, whether you've got to pull up, open doors, close doors, all those little things that people don't think about, that take for granted, because it becomes a schema built in for those who are ableist. You know, the world is built around ableist principles in design.
Yeah.
So we've got to look at ways how everybody here can think, okay, how can I create a space so that it's inviting for all my workforce and volunteers or people coming from the community? So it's really working with community. And as Yasmine has pointed out, and everybody here on the panel says, when you reach out, also consider reaching out to hospitals, because there's people, they're consumer advisory people on hospitals with disability.
That's true.
There's also councils, they're local disability action groups that every council, I think, around Australia has. So these are people who are passionate and wanting to speak and want to do. Now, the other space, which could be interesting to consider, talk to principals of special needs schools across Australia. Look, as a teacher, we have great students who are passionate, young people who are really digital savvy, who can really articulate in their way of communicating what works for them, and really partner up with those people in that space. But basically, if I can get one nugget of gold for everyone here, have a look at the access key, which we're giving to you free, and then consider about having people like us, you know, to help develop those things in your spaces. But most of all, encourage those with all living experience to be part of the journey. And remember, when you make, like I talk about cultural safety, it's not just for First Nation, it's for every community, every diversity. We want to make every space accessible and user-friendly. Thank you.
That's great. Good advice there, Ricki. And Irith, we cover a few of these things in our workshop. What's something that you'd like to focus on here?
Well, we do. I just wanted to go back to the how do we convince, you know, project owners or budget holders that it's important. Thankfully, there is a bit of a stick emerging now, which is around procurement. And I know OZeWAI is doing a lot of work on this. And I've experienced in my own professional situation working for a service provider with a new CTO who said, oh, we have to get accessible. How do we get accessible? Because thankfully, now there's legislation emerging in more and more countries to say, you know, if the government buys anything, it has to be accessible. It's becoming so now people who are providing products and services are having to think about accessibility, whereas, you know, maybe they wanted to put their head in the sands before. So all those sort of procurement requirements are helping to prioritize accessibility. And actually, we have to take the fear out of the idea of accessibility. The bulk of accessibility is not delivered through technical prowess. The WCAG guidelines are content guidelines. 80% of your accessibility is going to be delivered with accessible content and good, robust information architecture and an accessible design system, which is, there is nothing hard. If you're going to create a design system, just make it accessible. There's no more effort involved in making an accessible design system as an inaccessible design system. It makes it easier. It limits your color palettes. It tells you, you know, which colors are going to have the right contrast ratios. So just when you're starting something from scratch, say it has to be accessible. And then all your components for the lifetime of the digital experience are going to be accessible as long as you maintain that discipline.
And even currently, some of the government ones that are out there, New South Wales government, the Department of Agriculture has one. They're all public, so you can actually start from scratch with an accessible design system across the board. And if anyone's got any others that they have that they use in their own workplace, please feel free to put them in the chat as well to share with the other people on this call. Anything else about a top tip about buy-in as well then, Irith? Just that kind of leadership aspect. You know, I think, you know, including Scott Brimley, one of our co-facilitators, used to talk about bringing in, having a brown bag lunch and having leadership, you know, listen to the stories that people are gathering. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is not an area that I've read of widely. I know there are people who talk about this a lot. In my personal experience, yes, it's education, it's educating, it's show the pain. You know, the UX mantra is show, don't tell. So if you have executives or managers who are, you know, hard to convince, fine, just rub their nose in it, expose them to the really crap experiences that people with disabilities are having with their current service and their current product. Just confront them with that experience. And then this is true for all UX, whatever, you know, the decision maker, whatever their response is to that data is going to tell you, you know, whether it's worth trying to pursue anyway. If they're going to see someone suffer trying to use their product or service and not care or make excuses, then you know, sort of, you know, how high the mountain is to climb, and you have to think about what's really worth doing. The other thing, so doing that, sharing those experiences, sharing the raw data with team members is also a great way to start to have people's accessibility light bulbs turn on. We've all had those experiences in our own lives, if it's not part of our lived experience from an early age. And also finding advocates, because as Yasmine said, there are disabled people in your team, in your organization. They're there, they are there. And as you start to sort of surface some of this stuff, you will find some internal advocates and some internal champions to help sort of spread the word. So have a little working group. Just create an internal working group of people who are interested in accessibility, support each other, educate each other, and then each person will go back to their unit, their team, and start to sort of, you know, and the people who are in that working group who are taking those learnings back to their business areas are going to be singing from the same hymn sheet. So people in the organization are going to start hearing it from multiple people. So it's all part of the, you know, shifting the big container ship.
No, exactly right. So Ricki, any ideas on how to involve people from diverse backgrounds as part of regular research, design, development phases as people are working on products? What kind of steps should people take?
Well, I think the first step is to say, okay, if you're looking to design something specifically, what do we need? We need to have diverse voices, because remember, creativity comes from a space where you get the synergy of lots of people with different ways of seeing the world, how they surveil the world, how they make sense of the world. And one thing that, you know, I've discovered in my mid-50s now is that I'm a little bit dyslexic. So how does that impact when I'm trying to find an app or I'm trying to navigate something? Because it's the way my brain senses letters and words together. And I know that I have to put picture and words together to get the full information. So reaching out. So I always say, like, you know, councils, you know, there's many community spaces out there, local communities, you know, look out for LGBTIQ spaces, because remember, for a lot of people from my community, you know, don't feel have been disconnected in terms of binary systems. And what binary systems mean is that designers initially would design the world for men and for women, and in their designs becomes bias, gender bias, and how things are written into the coding. So what we need to do is sometimes have someone who is trans, identifying gender diverse, neurodiverse, joining that space of designing or thinking about how can we put this particular concept together and practical, because it may even be useful for other people. And that's what we're finding in some research spaces now, that when we're designing things which are that accommodate all different diversities of gender, it's also supporting those who are older and binary, because some of the ideas and how to phrase language and icons actually work for older people the same way. So you never know where the connectors are going to be, but having those different forms of people coming together, putting it out there, you know, in newsletters and everywhere. And please, please consider remuneration, even if it's, and I know sometimes money is tight and I get that, but you know, one thing that I really love and I always encourage organizations to do, and they think, oh, it's a silly thing, but I think it's a great thing, certificates of recognition and appreciation, because a lot of people love to be recognized and supported for their contribution, and that can help. And it's great for people's CV building.
Yeah. No, exactly right, Ricki. And we talk about this in our workshops as well, about the remuneration, but also that idea of sharing back to people that are contributing to your service and product. Show them, like, be transparent on your website. Oh, we've learnt this in our last round of testing, and these things changed. And explain, you know, that it came from evidence, from talking to a variety of people. People like to know that what they've contributed have been important and have made that change happen. Irith, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, remuneration is really important. And Ricki is someone who's very generous with her time. But in our workshops, we go to pains to say, don't just exploit people's goodwill, like educate your stakeholders about the need to fund, you know, these early relationship building and early consultations that you're having with people with disabilities, because whatever potential complexity or seriousness of disability of a person that you might want to include in research, there is a subject matter expert who can tell you exactly what to do and how to do it, and will problem solve, will understand what it is that you're trying to do, and will give you the perfect solution. And that subject matter expert is that potential participant. So learning how to have those opening conversations and those opening consultations with people are incredibly valued. That they're giving amazing training to your workforce, and people need to be remunerated for their subject matter expertise. And it pays off. You don't, you know, you build, as you start to gather these internal learnings and this internal wisdom, you start to build processes that you can scale. And what Ricki was talking about, where, you know, you can fix a problem for one person, but then you find out it actually fixes a problem for a multitude of other people, has a name. In accessibility, it's called the curb cut effect. So when we think of walking on a footpath, and we get to the curb of a road and there's that sloping cut. I don't know if it's the case that it was originally created for wheelchairs, but thinking of it as created for wheelchairs, we realize that that curb cut also helps parents with prams, small children, elderly people with walkers, elderly people with sticks. Like, so many people benefit from that curb cut, even if it was designed primarily for people using wheelchairs. And the same applies in design, in digital design and other types of design, that when we solve a problem for one person, it scales for other people. So yes, so we push very hard in our workshops about the need to educate budget holders for allocating budget for this early operations building, basically. So your potential participants are training you in your operations before they get into any type of data collection interaction with you.
No, that's a good point. And do you know the background of the curb cuts there? I think Dr. Manisha talks about that one. It's a university, wasn't it? Yasmine, do you know about that one? The university in the States?
No, I don't. I was just going to add
Yeah.
the remuneration. Going back to the principle we said earlier, that if you are building this in at the ground level, when you are first designing something and accessibility becomes embedded in everything you do, it's not going to become harder. It's going to become much easier. So what you're doing is you're investing in that process, accelerating that process of understanding accessibility innately, so that you don't have to tangibly check the box saying, I've done accessibility. It's innate. It's just part of what you're doing every day.
No, that's exactly right. And it's important. So I think the curb cuts is a great example of it. Like it kind of snowballed, right? It came into being that other people could use it, and it did start, I think, from university students in America in wheelchairs trying to get to the different venues that they were getting to, that they actually started to get the picks and the hammers. I think there's some pictures that a few people in the accessibility community share around that. But you're right, Yasmine. If it's considered from the start as you go, you think of your different cohorts, you think of your different people that could be utilized at different times. Then you're actually informing them, and then you're actually building also a cohort of people that want to see you improve. They want to see this get better. They're actually getting people on the journey with you. Yes, Ricki.
I want to say, when it comes to making sure people are rewarded for their time and ideas, also think about those of us who are on pensions and the implications that could have. Consider asking the person, how would you like to be paid? Would you like a voucher? And don't then presume with the voucher, because I struggle with when people send me an electronic voucher and I have to do all these things on the computer. My mind goes berserk and crazy, and I've lost some vouchers because I just get so inundated. I get really confused. Speak to the person, and if you're going to offer vouchers electronically, please make easy read ways how to access that. Do it like a 1-minute video recording showing the process, reading back the person saying, have you been able to access? Would you like someone to talk over with you how to do that? Offer money, but please always be respectful. Don't just presume, oh, we'll give them this and that's fine, because it has implications, because a lot of us living with disabilities may not be in workforces, and this does affect us in getting pensions. So please consider the options. And if you are using vouchers, ask the person, because not everyone shops at Coles, not everyone shops at Woolies. So try and be, and I know it's not easy, but if you're really looking for value adding and building community capacity, I just wanted to raise that as a thing. Thank you.
Thanks, Ricki. You got the background there, and thanks, Ricki, for your summary too. And I guess that's a really good point. Is pay people for their time. Ask people. It's all about choice. Accessibility, even in itself, when you're doing accessibility text and you're looking at the web content accessibility guidelines, most of it is like providing people with choice. So that goes with everything else that you're doing. Whatever you can do with accommodations, work out what your accommodations are already in your research environment. Share them with the participants. And then actually, ask, is there anything else to add to it? But don't make people start from scratch if you already know what accommodations are in place. Now we're halfway through our session. It's already such a wonderful discussion. If anyone needs to take a break or stretch their legs or anything like that, please go ahead. If you've got questions, please put them in the chat as we go. We have got some backup questions, but we'd love to hear yours as well. I'm sure you've got some pretty tough ones that you'd like the discussion to go to. There was someone who mentioned that they are finding it hard to get the buy-in. At times, it's wondering if the mountain is too large to die on, but this is really motivating. I'm glad that you're thinking that. Just going to our panel, what are some of those small things that can make you feel like the mountain is not that large? Maybe Yasmine? Because I mean, you've done it with Get Aboutable with this amazing travel conference. It is probably one of the most accessible conferences I've ever been to, and I've been to a few. I've run a few. So tell us, what are some of the little things that people can do to get started and keep that motivation going?
Well, I guess the first question is, it depends on the type of the mountain. Obviously, you've got hierarchy that is completely ignorant and unenthused and doesn't see the point. And you're reliant on them for a job. My first question would be, is this a place I want to work and start looking for a job elsewhere? But if you think you can influence the mountain, first of all, surrounding yourself with people who are thinking along the same lines. So, for instance, in the digital accessibility space, joining OZeWAI, you're going to have people who have faced similar mountains and who can help you find the solutions. And I mean, we do that at Get Aboutable. We provide a network, and that's the whole basis of our conference. In the accessible inclusive tourism space, so that people on various steps of the journey, from novice beginners who say, hey, this is a great idea, how do I get started, all the way through to people who've been doing this for 20 years, can exchange networks and exchange ideas and network. So, I mean, I know OZeWAI does the same thing in the digital accessibility space. So, I think figuring out what the mountain is that you need to scale and finding allies to scale that mountain and help you scale that mountain.
Yeah, that's a good point. Irith, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would definitely second finding allies. Like, there's nothing worse than feeling isolated. So, yes. Try and look for allies. The other thing I would say is there will be low-hanging fruit. You can shift the dial tomorrow on something that you're working on, even if it's something like, we've never thought about a tab order on our page, or we've never thought about a tab order on our forms. So let's just at least have a logical tab order, or define what our tab order needs to be. If someone's not using a mouse, if they're using a keyboard to navigate through a screen, where do you want the cursor to land? What order do you want the cursor to land in? That's an accessibility service. So even doing things like that, none of our images have alt text. Let's start applying alt text to our images. There'll be some low-hanging fruit, little thing that you can do. Not all of our headings are coded properly. We don't always have our H1s and our H2s coded properly, or we're using really obscure names for pages. Like, let's make our HTML semantic, instead of calling it page 0041 in the HTML, let's call it about us. Let's make it semantic, let's make it intelligible to humans. Just doing things like that, starting to shift the dial, and they're things that there's low barriers technically, in a sense, to those types of things. Just looking at something that I did, I managed to sort of bring some guerrilla accessibility into a project because it was an information architecture project. So I said, well, you know, people using assistive technology and disabled people are key indicators of the robustness of an information architecture. If a screen reader user can use it, then that's, you know, can give us comfort.
Good start. Yeah.
If someone who has their colors inverted and it uses high magnification can navigate through, can use this information architecture, then that's, you know, that's, if we're only going to test with 8 people, let's make it people with disabilities, which we did. It was in a higher education institution. And that was a huge educational, you know, again, show don't tell. That was a huge educational experience for the stakeholders in that organization. And they could feel confident about their information architecture. So just look for maybe guerrilla, for want of a better word, strategies to start to normalize, including people with
I love that one, Irith. I like to use the avoid the click here and make your link descriptive, because you can do that anywhere. You can do that in a Word document. You can do that in your email. You can do it anywhere, and it's a good first one for people, because if they put something like a click here, you can have the discussion and say, you know, someone will get a list of click here's here, then they don't know where they're going. So, you know, creating that kind of descriptive link is really, really important, and it also means that you have that's easier content to read, because you don't have the click here at the end. So it's like open the, you know, the Word document with the name of it instead. That one, and also hashtags used on social media. Use camel case. It's more likely to read that by assistive technology if you use camel case rather than the lowercase. And then it's not going to be all one word jumbled together. Yes, Yasmine, you've got a couple of tips there.
Not so much a couple of tips. I'm wondering if anybody on this webinar actually knows the answer. So I've got a bugbear with camel cases when you use hashtags.
Yeah.
You start using camel cases and you autofill the end, it always kills all the camel cases.
Yes, that's on LinkedIn. It's an unfortunate setting of LinkedIn.
Okay,
I think it's all of them.
I think it's everywhere.
Yeah. So unfortunately, Yasmine, it's, you know, part of the disability debt. We have to manually, we have to manually write every single hashtag to keep it camel case.
Yeah.
Yep.
Somebody should fix that.
Exactly, and that's something to take back to you know, the social media. If they're, you know, asking you for feedback, then put the feedback in and say, can you make sure that I can put camel case in my you know, in my hashtags instead of the other way around. Excellent. All right, so Irith, we're just going to go back to our inclusive research principles and just kind of touch on those. How can they support researchers at the right time? And if you'd like to share a little bit about the principles to start with.
Did you want to give everyone a break, or because we didn't have
I've told people to take a break and stretch.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought everyone was going to like stop.
No. If everyone's happy to keep going.
All right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yes. So sorry, Bri, what was the question about the principles?
Oh, it's just about our inclusive research principles. If you'd like to share a little bit about them, and then how they can support researchers at the right time.
Yeah. So I will type this into chat so you don't have to remember what I'm saying, but I'll just talk first. So there are 5 principles, fundamental principles of inclusive research, probably inclusive design, and but we can claim it's for research at this stage. There are 2 values principles and 2 practice principles, and then there's a principle that straddles values and practice, which is safety. So I'll start with that one. So safety is a fundamental principle, and there's different types of safety. There's generalizable sort of overarching safety aspects, and there's also, you know, like physical safety, cognitive safety, which has to do with things like being able to process and understand information. So for example, for people with dyslexia, they need designs that are cognitively safe and research artifacts that are cognitively safe. And psychosocial safety is the other safety,
Yeah.
which we feel we have an intuition for, but we don't really know how to articulate it and express it, which is about dealing with the effects of stigma and working with people who are in stigmatized situations and being trauma informed. So basically the principles of trauma informed practice are very much where the psychosocial safety practice sits. So safety has values and it also has practice implications. And then the next values principle is diversity. So as Yasmine and Ricki have already said, there's diversity of experiences. You can't say, oh, I've met one blind person, I can make inferences from that one blind person that this is going to be what it's like for all blind people. So there's lots of variability in people's lived experiences of similar conditions. And so it's learning, like, part of our training is about how to manage diversity across people's experiences and across different conditions. And equity is another principle, which is where the discussion around remuneration comes in. And also Ricki's point about you might have your equity hat on and think we're going to pay everybody, we're going to pay everyone as subject matter experts and everyone's going to get $200 for an hour's session. But that's not always the best thing for everybody. Yeah. So there's diversity in the needs of people's experiencing equity. And I don't know if you can see in Bri's background, the Inclusive Research Workshops logo is like in different interwoven colors. These principles are not a Venn diagram. They're all interwoven with each other. They all affect each other. So if our values are safety and diversity and equity, like how do we do it? How do we practice in that way? And our two practice principles are immersion. So immersion is about you as a human being making a decision, am I going to personally commit to caring about this stuff and opening up my emotional and my intellectual and my physical bandwidth to hear these stories, to learn about this, and to build authentic human connections with people and communities. And you might not be in the position to make that commitment. You might be overloaded already. So this is like us trying to be explicit. This is about a human dedication and an investment of your own personal time. It's not under professional development. It's not like a professional thing. It's a human personal thing. And you have to have a think about, am I in a position to invest, take my resources, because it will take your resources, and invest in this area. So so immersion is about doing that. It's about putting aside your assumptions and learning about people's experiences. And the more you do that, the more you get immersed, the more you start to understand the scale of the diversity, like just the difference in people's attitudes and how they respond to the same type of treatment and how they solve problems. Like, it's incredibly diverse. And you can only learn that through immersion. There's no other way of learning that. So our second practice principle is piloting. So your whole research operations, your potential participants are your co-operators. You're co-designing the research operations. You're not the expert. You know what type of data you want. You know what type of insights you want. That's all you know. You basically don't know anything else about how to progress and proceed with this particular individual participant or with a particular community. So you share the problem. Okay, this is what we would love to learn. We don't know how to find that out or how to help you communicate with us what we need to learn. If you were doing the research, how would you do it? Is the question that we need to be asking potential participants. And the more we learn from participants, the more we can raise the tide of our understanding and have less and less and less sort of load on potential participants about what to tell us. We can get more right, we can get more lined up, but we still need that final check, that pre-flight check with the potential participant. Is this going to work for you? Is this what's going to work for you? And one of the biggest themes across all of those values is flexibility. It can change. What some person agrees to and says they need on the day of the the activity, they might not be able to do it. So what's your plan B? So always having a plan B is part of what we learn about inclusive research operations. So they're the principles, and that's basically sort of, and the way that they how are they useful? They're useful for planning, they're useful for managing situations like in real time, and they're useful for evaluating and iterating on your operations and what you plan for next time. That's how they're useful. And they're useful for building confidence. They're really useful for building confidence and competency. So you feel comfortable with not having all the answers and not being the expert.
Thanks, Irith. It's quite a summary of our 3-hour workshop that we run. But it is actually that precursor of really understanding what that diversity is like, and those principles really help people to think a little bit differently. And it's open for people to who really want to learn, keep learning as they go as researchers. And I put this link in earlier, but there might be some other people in the chat now, which is the good practice guidelines from the Disability Gateway that were developed. Now, these are more the checklists. So they won't tell you how to do the immersion. They will tell you that once you have done the immersion, you've got your cohorts, these are the kind of checklists that you need to make sure that are in place. They're quite useful, and totally recommend that you use that approach. The other approach is to think about, if you're in a government department particularly, or an organisation that's working through an iterative agile process, consider using the digital service standard and the service design and delivery process to plan your cohort and plan who you can research with. Make sure it's in that planning, in that discovery, and it's budgeted for. Consider extra time participating for people to get there, and also obviously for the paying them in various ways. And if you are, we've had discussions in our workshops, if you have some people who are internal to your organization, that it might not be their role to be their tester for you all the time. Talk about within your organization, is it part of their performance approach? Are they given time to help with the testing or help with research, so that you can actually get some really good feedback internally without the other costs, but also with not taking away the person's time from their everyday job. So Yasmine, so just back on that with those principles, how have you thought about using them with the conference with Get Aboutable? Because like I said, it's a wonderful experience. What have you learned, and how do these principles fit in with that the organization of your travel conference?
I have to admit, I hadn't heard the principles articulated so succinctly before, and I was madly taking notes, so I'm sorry I've screened to do that. But yeah, absolutely, I can absolutely see where these principles fit into our annual conference. So in terms of safety, making sure that everybody knows it's an open space, and having the announcements at the start of the conference of, people should feel free to walk around or step out where the quiet spaces are. There's a whole list of things that we include as part of our housekeeping, just to make people feel safe, and not just physically, but emotionally as well. Valuing the diversity of the people in attendance of those conferences. I mentioned earlier that we have everything from tourism operators who are just starting, who I keep hearing about this term accessible tourism and feel that they should learn more about it, but just have really no understanding of it beyond that, all the way to people who've been in the field since, I don't know, the 1990s or earlier. In terms of equity, that example about remuneration is absolutely one to keep in mind. And asking people, and that it flips back to safety, asking people to let us know how they would like to be remunerated, or how they would like accessibility to be built in for them. There's no point having an Auslan interpreter if nobody's going to use the Auslan interpreter. We've had a discussion about it of, there is value in having an Auslan interpreter or Braille on our business cards, for instance, for all the people who can see it and therefore think about it, and it's more like an advertising. But we make sure that we're asking. We have Auslan interpreters available, but we make sure that they're sitting near the people or standing in front of the people who need those interpreters.
Yeah.
In terms of practice and principles, immersion. I mean, that's the whole principle of our conference, is immersion with people with disability, with tourism operators, to have that collective experience of exchanging ideas and best practice and network, so that we can move on for the, in all of our journeys, because it's a never-ending journey. Accessibility, you're never going to get everything right, and that's a really important principle as well. It's that humility of being there with the goodwill. And a change, you're not always going to get everything right, and you're never going to be perfect. So giving yourself permission to do the best you can, but not beat yourself up for things that you get wrong, or not getting to the perfect accessibility. It's not possible. There's always going to be something new you can learn, a new technology, a new way of doing things. It's all about that growth and piloting of testing, and more testing. I wasn't sure if there was going to be a spot in this webinar to talk about a recent incident I had where my computer operating system updated, and all of a sudden my on-screen keyboard, because I can't type, so I use primarily voice activated interaction with my computer, but for things that I'm getting frustrated that my voice is not coming through, I use an on-screen keyboard with a mouse clicker. And that on-screen keyboard suddenly, every time my computer went to sleep, would disappear.
Oh no.
I could not pull it up again. So I have a setting where my on-screen keyboard comes up when I wake my computer up, so I can type the password onto my computer. So all of a sudden, for about 4 weeks, I had to get a carer to type in my password.
Yeah.
There's an issue of security there, but also it meant that if I didn't have anybody here, which is, probably about 6 hours a day, if I didn't unfreeze my computer before they left, I couldn't get anything done. And it was obviously something with the operating system. It happened with an update, and lo and behold, my keyboard came back with the next update. So
there you go.
somebody figured out, there's probably not a huge percentage of people who use this on-screen keyboard, but I know within Get Aboutable, at least 2 of us do.
Yeah.
So granted, we're a higher proportion than most for using accessibility features. But yeah, that idea of piloting, pilot your first go, pilot your updates, pilot everything, because you never know. I mean, that was such a tiny little quirk, and I don't know what they changed in the operating system that made it disappear. But for those people who use that feature, it's debilitating.
Yeah. Yeah. So Ricki, as part of you've been involved in a variety of different aspects, like Yasmine in testing as well, either physical or in digital space. What are some of the tips that you could say to people about, what's important to consider when you're starting to engage with people with diverse backgrounds and you're bringing them in for research or usability testing?
Yeah, I just sort of put a comment here about making sure all your practices are trauma informed with care, because everyone comes with their own living experiences of things that's happened to them in the past. Even as we were mentioning about how long each session will be, making sure you have that one-to-one conversations with people, safe, not in the group setting, but one-to-one, make a bit of time and just say this is how we're going to work. This is the project idea. We're going to be testing this. We're going to be looking at this. How are you comfortable with using this app? Do you need breaks? Do you need time to reflect your ideas? One of the things that we've found works really well with neurodiverse people like myself is sometimes we don't force people to make a decision or idea on the spot, because some people's brains work better when they reflect, and they might get back to you within a couple hours or a day because they process everything, they visualize, and then you get a really good response. So giving people the agency to respond to when they can works really well, because some people feel the pressure to say, so giving people the space to say, I will pass at this point, I'll consider and I'll come back to you. That's sort of like a really important tool. Also having the breaks, because that's important, the lighting, the sound of your voice, giving people an opportunity to speak, to giving a process where people can have a viewpoint, allowing people to have differing points of view, and calling it different points of view. Don't call it am I saying don't, using that word don't, refrain, I should say, but refrain from saying disagreement, because disagreement is a very negative connotation, especially in disability and diverse communities, because we see that as a form of lateral violence, and that we've experienced, especially in First Nations. So differing points of view, using comments like, I want to sit with that. Would you like to sit with that idea? Can we park your idea at the moment and get back to you? So always valuing the person's experience, validating whatever little bit they wish to contribute, and always thanking people for that contribution, because that goes a long way. It's not always about remuneration, for money. It's also about respecting people's value, because we're valuing their ideas, and ideas is where we're heading in the future. Thank you.
No, exactly right, Ricki. Did you want to add to that, Irith?
Yes, well, we talk about this in our workshops, but I try and build all of those types of I was going to say accommodations. I don't really mean it, but like options into our research recruitment. So we make it very explicit from the very beginning. You have a choice of different durations. You could have a half hour, 45-minute, a 60-minute. You can choose which time of day you want to engage, morning, afternoon, evening. So we offer like a lot of different options for how people want to engage, how they want to manage their energy levels and what they're being asked to do. We ask, do you need questions sent in advance? We offer, I try and offer the option of phone-based only interviews, because most of my research is remote, and even chat-based. Do you want to have a chat-based interview? So just think of all the different things that you can offer people to start off with, so that there's no awkwardness. And then again, it normalizes that there's not one way of doing things. This is not the expert researcher telling you have to do it this way. And so because you've already normalized all of that, when you say, is there anything else that, how else can we support you engaging, or what else do you need? People feel a lot more relaxed about making a suggestion. And also with the trauma-informed point of view, control is a key principle of trauma-informed practice. So we make it very explicit from the earliest recruitment that you know, you will have control over your engagement. Just because this is what you've picked now doesn't mean you can't change your mind. So we're always flagging, you have control over what you do and how and what you say and when you do it.
And Ricki, you've got your hand up there. Thanks, Irith. That's totally correct.
Oh, just one really quick snippet of gold, and I wanted to share in this space, everyone. Remember recording of the information, because we know that sometimes if you're going to want to record to capture the synergy of conversations, always ask for permission. Explain how you're going to use that recorded information, when you're going to destroy it, how you're going to, where it's going to live. But remember, data integrity is so important in the research space, design space. What am I going to do with it? Are you going to de-identify it? Are you going to destroy it? What is your disposal policy? Always be upfront with your participants. Explain that explicitly to them. I always now do a video, a 1 minute summary, easy video, I call it easy speak video, as well as something in writing, just so that people know, because it is their data. You've been privileged to use that data, and you don't want that data to be misused, all that, because today, in today's society, with all these things happening, people want to know the security procedures you have. Thank you.
Yeah, no, exactly right, Ricki. And I've just put a link into the research ops community, which the 8 pillars cover that as a principle as well. So, you know, if you haven't looked into the research ops community, it's a very large global chat on Slack, sorry. And there's up to like 15,000 people globally, all having these discussions around inclusive research and different ways to manage people's data and privacy. So look, we've got nearly only about just under 15 minutes to go. I'm just going to open it up to anyone here. Are there any questions that anyone from the that's attending today that would like to ask? Feel free to put your hand up or put the question in the chat. We've still got a couple of questions that we could go to here, but we'd love to hear some from basically the attendees. Why are you here? What are you wish? Are we covering everything you wish to learn? Is there something specific that you would like to ask these panelists? No? Okay. Yeah, feel free. Oh, yes. Sorry, who's that? Can you say your name, please, first?
Owen.
Owen, yes. Hello, Owen. Yes, thank you. Okay, what is your question?
In the last few years, how have you found the development of everybody working remotely from home and various locations? How has that affected inclusive research? Has it been, you know, sort of for the better because the use of technology has been kind of there anyway in the accessibility space, or has it raised a bunch of new issues, new problems?
It's a great question. I'm going to go to Yasmine first. Go, Yasmine.
I was going to say, I won't answer the question from a research perspective, but from a people with disability perspective, COVID has been the most wonderful thing. And don't get me wrong, COVID's been horrible, but in terms of web accessibility, and I don't know if people can think back to, you know, March, April 2020, when everybody was panicking about how are they going to work remotely. In our company, we're going, welcome to our world. We've been doing this for years. And, you know, for years, people with disability have been begging for remote working arrangements, for improved tools. And it was always in the too hard basket. But then suddenly, when the entire world goes into lockdown, all these tools just became exponentially better. And I would, in terms of research, you know, let Irith and Bri talk about the research and how it's actually worked on those research principles. But just keep in mind that where there's a will, there is a way. I mean, it's incredible the advances in technology and accessibility technology that have happened just because the whole world was locked down. And I just hope that we continue to have those advancements, because just like with the curb cuts, the advantages have been much wider than just helping people work through lockdown.
No, exactly right. And I think even the way we discuss it, we try and run our workshops as accessible as possible. We have activities that are using accessible tools as much as we can, and if not, we allow for accommodations for different ways for people to give input. One of the other things is research-wise, particularly, but I also found that since COVID, in the research ops community, there's actually another tool there called the Toolbox of research ops. I'm just putting the link in the chat. There's over 500 tools, UX tools that could be used in that research ops, used for repositories or for research gathering or discovery or collaboration. Not many of them are accessible. So people are like throwing out these tools but not really thinking about the accessibility of them. The ones that are, because they'll have some kind of an accessibility statement or a roadmap. We're working with the research ops community to list the tools that do have some accessibility aspects to it, because they want to promote it. They see it as a competitive edge. So we're starting to see that as a positive thing. So if there's a UX tool that has they've done their accessibility audit, they've got a what's called a voluntary product accessibility template, they will then be able to put that link up and say, we are more accessible, so use our product and use it as a competitive edge. So I think that's come out of this a lot stronger, is that products themselves have had to start to think about their accessibility aspects. Ricki or Irith, did you have something you want to add to that, the research perspective and COVID? Yeah, Ricki?
I just wanted to quickly say, like Yasmine echo, it has been my lifesaver. And I'm also, because I have spinal damage on my lower back, so I can barely walk, but also for being trans, as a trans older woman who always used to get laughed at and abused on the streets, I found it so much safer. And my community also says it too. If you look different, the Zoom has been a safety net for many of us, where we can meet safely, make conversations without having to do the perils of accessing public transport, going to a space, having toilets that work, trying to get taxis that work, that will take you. And so I see this as gold, but what I do have, putting my research hat, and thank God for people like OZeWAI and that, who are looking at, well, hang on a minute, it's not just clicking a button and Zoom and bang, that's here it goes. Yeah. There's a lot of infrastructure work that has to be done, more so because you have to make that virtual space inviting for dynamics, because human beings weren't born to sit in front of the screen. We are tactile, we're smelling, we're agents of movement. So how do we create that? So this is the important tool. We've got to look at how do we incorporate that, but always remember, everybody, that those of us with disabilities, please don't assume that, we want to go to a locality, because as I put in the chat with the access keys, getting to a space is a lot of energy for us, a lot of scary things we have no control over. And we've got to work at transport, look at toilets, look at all these things that for many people, ableist people, take for granted. Not saying that you all take, but you may not have to consider it. But for some of us, we have to consider it because it's a life and death situation. So it's all about that. So thank you, OZeWAI. And I genuinely mean it, because we need spaces like that to really understand how do we make. So I'm sitting in a chair to remind people, are you comfortable? Do you want to add another cushion? All those little things that are so important when we're on Zoom. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. You have a comment to add to that, Irith?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the volume of people with disabilities who can now be included in research or who are welcomed into research, it's just an ocean compared to a trickle before. So it's been incredibly enabling. I have a bee in my bonnet about in-person only events and in-person only, you know, in certainly in my world, in design and UX, there's all sorts, you know, there's training about equity, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is only in person. So anything that's not hybrid is exclusionary. If it's not hybrid, it's excluding people. And you know, if you're going to insist on in-person only, then you have to, you know, wear that we're choosing to be exclusionary. Having said that, there is the aspect of first-hand observation and first-hand interaction, human to human, that goes into your gut as a researcher, that builds your intuitive and empathic understanding of people's experiences, just what you're observing, what you're feeling, that doesn't come across through screens. So, you know, I would never go back. I would never want to turn back the clock, but I would love to find a way of still supporting in-person research occasionally, because I think we really degrade our learnings, and our learnings are impoverished by not having that human to human, being in the same space with somebody with lived experience.
Do you want to add to that, Yasmine?
Yeah, Irith, spot on. We have struggled with exactly that point so much with Get Aboutable. So our annual conference was only online for the first 2 years. We were meant to start in 2020 and with a live event. Bri, you can remember when we were set that up. It seems so long ago.
It does.
Yeah, we got the seed funding for the conference in 2019. It was meant to be held in 2020. So we all know what happened to that, and we ended up running the conference the first 2 years virtually. Then the next, so that was 21, 22, 2023, we ran it as a hybrid, and we have been struggling with that concept of, we want it to be hybrid because it's inclusion at its best. But also, we're finding much better interactions in person, as you described, Irith. And I'm struggling to find the right word, and it's not the word I'm looking for. But and as someone with a physical disability, I am cringing as I say it. So please, apologies in advance for what can be described in an ableist culture as physical laziness. If it's too easy to attend something virtually, why bother attend physically? And so, I think one balance is that we have it primarily as a physical event. And then, you know, we have recordings available for people who can't attend. It then, you know, the problem is then how do you have that interaction with the live space? The other thing is that we do have a series of bi-monthly webinars. And so we've got conference-like content, but like as a one subject matter. So, you know, if you think of individual sessions of a conference, actually having one session 1 month, another session a couple months later, and those are only virtual. So there's a bit of a balance. So yeah, long-winded answer to there's a balance. I fully agree that hybrid is best, but how do you ensure that as many people are actually physically in the room?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so we've come up to 1:30. I'm going to finish it off there and to say thank you so much to the wonderful panelists today, for Irith, Ricki, and Yasmine. I think we covered a lot of topics. I really appreciated your feedback and your input. Owen's asked about best recruitment channels. Owen, can you just kind of elaborate on that? Maybe we can, recruiting yes, so there's a couple of organizations that organize recruitment panels. So one of them is Ability Works in Melbourne. They do have a register of panels. The other one is in Topia Connect. They have, but they also then would want to do a lot of the research or the usability testing. So that's something to consider. But you can also start to reach out. I think there's Fable that's considering, you know, some people might have been trying to use them in Australia as well. But reach out to OZeWAI. We can find people as well for you, or at least the contacts for those recruiting participants, or go through your usual recruitment panels and ask, do you have a relationship with organizations, with people with disability or from diverse backgrounds that you use in your recruitment? Check what their rules are, check what their requirements are, because sometimes they actually don't have them listed. But you can also go directly to some of the advocacy organizations, and they would provide you with a lot of the safety and the principles, you know, to actually make sure that you're looking after the people that you are recruiting through those avenues as well. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Yasmine. Thanks, Ricki. Thanks, Irith. Thanks for everyone attending and registering today. Please join OZeWAI, contribute. Let us continue this series. We do a lot of in-person events as well, so that costs money. And we also want to try and get some more international speakers for some of our future topics. And also, please do the survey that we're trying to get some evidence for the Future Skills organisation that there is a gap in the digital accessibility space in education and employment. So please share that on your networks. That would be great. And register for our next two events. They're already up on our Humanitics and on our website. So the one in April is on accessibility and gaming and virtual reality. And the one in May is on accessible ICT procurement. And we've got something that we'll be announcing at that one as well. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. See you.
Bye. Bye.